everybody, Nick here, and I got another review for you today in the Thrifty Thursdays line of reviews. And today we're talking about the Spyderco Byrd, B-Y-R-D, Meadowlark. So for those of you who don't know, Byrd is Spyderco's line of cheaply made Chinese knives. They are much less expensive than your normal Spydercos, and there are a lot of them that have matches, like this is the cheap version of your Spyderco Delica. But Byrd is kind of held to be a separate brand and is managed very differently and is finished very differently. So we're going to talk about this little guy today, and the magic number here is $20. This is a $20 pocket knife. So, as always, let's go into the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the very best part of this knife is that it's damn near a copy of one of the best, if not the best, EDC knife that's out there, your Spyderco Delica. I got videos on videos about your Delica, but the Byrd is basically a direct rip-off of your Delica, and so it inherits a lot of good stuff, meaning this blade shape is pretty damn good, and this is almost exactly what you see on your Delica. The overall handle shape is there, and that's pretty damn good. It's a backlock, and it's a well-proven backlock. Even if this one doesn't feel particularly good, it's still a backlock, and it's still gonna be secure. I did some spine whacking on this guy and had no problems at all. So the design is proven, and in a lot of ways, you're getting something that approximates a Delica in some of the best ways that a Delica is. There are also a couple of changes that I do like individually. You can see here on your Byrd, you've actually got a finger choil here, whereas on your Delica, you've just kind of got an implied finger choil. You can use it as such if you've got small fingers, but on the Byrd, it's meant to be, and so that works. Although I'll say that the ergonomics are still not as good on your Byrd. They had to leave something. And then I actually do like a lot the Byrd shape of the hole. And not that I want them to do it on Spyderco. It's not functionally interesting, but it is different, and it actually doesn't functionally make a big difference. Because during the entire deployment with the Spidey hole, you're in this bottom round part. So this is a cool way for them to differentiate the two brands, while at the same time, doing something stylish. So, okay, yeah, no problem there. So the good is really that it's ripping off something that's great, your Spyderco Delica, and so that's a nice thing. Let's now go into your bad. So there's a good amount of bad here. First and foremost is the steel. The steel here is 8CR13 MOV, which is on that list of steels that I say is either barely acceptable or barely unacceptable. It'll work for everyday cutting tasks, and it would work better if this came sharp. That's another bad thing. But anyways, but it's just not going to be very impressive. It's not going to hold an edge for long. You're not going to be super happy with this steel. I'll probably say that, even just for an EDC kind of situation. Not a great steel. Second, in terms of materials, this plastic is kind of ugly. And what I mean by that is not just visually, but just in terms of feel. This feels like a very cheap plastic, as opposed to on your Delica, where it feels like it's a fiberglass reinforced kind of thing. It feels harder, and it feels nicer in the hand. And even compared to the plastic on your Cold Steel Tough Light, which has a much harder feel to it, and it feels more purposeful. This feels cheap, and that's kind of a big distinction that we'll get through there in a bit. The clip itself, speaking of feeling cheap, feels very weak, like I could spring this or break it off with just a single, if I were to catch this on a seatbelt or something, that clip's gone. And then finally, just the fit and finish on this knife is really bad. Meaning, things like the back spacer is sticking up a good ways off of the back of the knife. None of your screws are recessed. All of your lettering is really poorly done out of the thing. There were areas where the blade wasn't buffed as well as where it was buffed. You can see that there's a lot of melting. So this is a full flat round blade, which means that the basic bevel for the blade goes all the way to the top. On the Delica, you can see there's a very sharp line there. But on your Byrd, you can see that it's kind of a rounded, contoured surface. That probably means that either they just did it with some kind of a softer material or somebody spent a little too long polishing it. But either way, it's not a beautiful thing. A lot of your surfaces that need to be a little smoother really aren't. Particularly the top part of this Byrd is actually probably could cut you open. Luckily your thumb sits more here, but you can tell they didn't bother to sand up in this area, which is kind of frustrating. The lanyard tube is really tough to get through. Not a big fan of that. You'd have to really push a lanyard through with something, because there's not a lot of smoothness. You can see a bunch of different layers and constrictions inside there, which is another sign of poor, well, just poorly done in general. And I mean, that's just kind of the overall theme of this knife, is that this knife doesn't feel inexpensive, it feels cheap. And, you know, actually that just comes around to the ugly, so let's go there. The ugly here is that honestly this knife feels like a cheap Chinese knockoff of your Spyderco Delica. And it's possible to do a less expensive version of a knife and have it still feel good, but this one they really didn't. You can see that they are cutting every possible corner in order to get something knife-shaped out the door. And that's a little disappointing, but honestly it feels like a gas station knockoff. And my vision of how the Byrd company was formed is that at some point in time they busted into a factory making knockoff Delicas, and Sal Glesser came in and said, "You work for us now," and just decided to keep the lines going, except add a little notch in there. And so now he's got a source of ready-made cheap Delicas that, you know, he can sell for $20 because they're really poorly done. And that's, I think, just disappointing for me. I really had hoped that they would try and port some of the constant pursuit of perfection even into making a good cheap knife, but I just don't get that impression. And especially given how much I love the Delica, which is honestly one of the best, if not the best, blades out there. And I mean, I really do like this knife. This is almost insulting to me. Like, you know, really, you couldn't have done a better homage to your Delica from the same damn company. So that's frustrating. I'd like to actually contrast it for a second, and I think this captures it nicely. This is a $20 knife, but it's a $20 version of a $65 knife, your Delica. This is an expensive thing that's done really, really cheaply, and it shows. Compare that to your Cold Steel Tough Light, which is a knife that is $30, but it's set out to be a $30 knife. And they built the knife and they designed the knife such that for $30 they can get you something pretty compelling. Whereas here, they've just tried to port something by throwing away everything they can possibly get rid of, and ended up with something that's just unpleasant and just not a gem overall. So, you know, this is a cheap thing done well, and this is an expensive thing done cheaply, and that's a big distinction, and it's not something I'm a fan of. So, your Byrd Meadowlark, I'm really, really not that impressed with. And if you're thinking about it, honestly, wait. Because for $20 more, you can move up to your Spyderco Persistence. This is a loaner from a reader, a viewer that is, and it's a much nicer knife, and I got a review of that coming, don't worry. And for another $40, you can move up to the real thing, and you can get one of the best, if not the best, EDC knives out there. So if right now you're watching this video because you've got $20 in your pocket and you want to buy a Spyderco Byrd, give it another little while until you got $40 and buy yourself a Persistence, or better still, just save up and do your damn Delica. You'll be much happier with it, and this'll be a knife you can love for years, versus this guy, which I don't trust to last you months. So, that's my final verdict on the Byrd, is just don't. This is not going to be the winner of the Thrifty Thursdays competition, I guarantee you. And I'm a little disappointed, honestly, that Spyderco would let this go on under their overall roof. But, you know, such is life, and they've got a bottom line too. So, that's your Byrd Meadowlark. This is a non-gem. I don't even have a term for it. What's the opposite of gem? This is a freaking pebble. This is a rock. This is a clump of dirt. And I'm really disappointed by that fact. I had hoped to like this a lot because it's based on something I love. But such is life. Hope this is helpful, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of your day, and do not buy your Spyderco Byrd Meadowlark.